Thumbs up. Do you guys see the short sheet on Zoom?
Never came in.
Good. Thank you, Bob. All right, great to see everybody. I hope everyone had a lovely Thanksgiving. I know it feels like a while back.
It's the whole though. I'll tell you, my Thanksgiving was my Midrash class.
I missed it too. I know. Sorry, we couldn't have it. So we're just gonna give it another couple minutes as people grab some lunch. But I'll go ahead and introduce what we're going to talk about this week. I want to talk about cognitive dissonance, the sort of psychological phenomenon of holding two contradictory realities at once. And often when you experience cognitive dissonance, you want to resolve it as quickly as possible or dispel the confusion and have clarity. But where the arc of this class is going to take us is what is the value of sort of standing in that space of cognitive dissonance without trying to resolve it with a nice little bow. But what's that's right. Sort of the space of uncertainty, and also last time we talked about truth, and we talked about objective truth, subjective truth, if there could be multiple truths. So this kind of dovetails nicely on that session, which is different kinds of truth as well. So not just necessarily multiple truths, but maybe the cognitive dissonance between religious truth and secular truth. And when those can be at odds.
So timely. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You did a good job.
So the first text is notoriously confusing. I'm curious if people have heard of it. It's pretty famous. This is the four who entered into the orchard.
Oh, yeah.
Tyvel summed it up. I suspected as much. So people are familiar with it. There are a lot of different interpretations of this, and we're not going to go super deep into all of the Kabbalistic, mystical interpretations, but we'll definitely touch on it. But it's a good starting place for our conversation today. So does anybody want to go ahead and start reading in the English?
Okay.
Great, thank you.
The sages taught, four entered the orchard, and they are as follows: Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher, and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said to them, when you reach pure marble stones, do not say water, water, because it is stated, he who speaks falsehood shall not be established before my eyes. Keep going.
Yeah, it's so confusing that I feel like chiming in doesn't even help until we're done.
Winston died, and with regard to him, the verse states, precious in the eyes of the Lord is the death of the pious ones. Then Zoma glimpsed and was harmed, and with regard to him, the verse states, have you found honey? Eat as much as is sufficient for you, lest you become full from it and vomit it. Acher chopped down the shoots. He became a heretic. Rabbi Akiva came out safely.
Great, thank you. Okay, Sheila says she thinks she understands it. Go for it.
When you have a kid, he makes an association, and I've never seen it.
Okay.
Believe it or not. And when you see a kid, there's an association between one thing and another. In other words, you see a marble stone. The kid sees something else.
That's the
And he has seen before. He said he can call it a log. Water is hard to imagine.
Right.
It's a different substance. But he's looking at it as something that he associates with it. I have this with, I'll see something and say, oh, that's not what that is. It's this. And that could be, but I don't understand the water and, and stone.
Right.
But there are people who see something totally different from what you see.
Yeah, like a piece of art, right?
I have a
Sherry and then Ron.
Isn't that like the story when the people, I forget how many, surround the elephant. One's blind and so he
Good.
feels, and the other one, you know, they each feel a different part and think it's something else.
Yeah. Right. So that was the allegory of if you, can you remind us? Because so if there's a bunch of people who are blind and they feel different parts of an elephant, they would all claim that it's something
Feels the tusk and he
different.
thinks, oh, it's a spear here.
Right.
Another one feels the tail and thinks it's a rope.
Yeah.
And it's all the same thing.
Right. But you need communication to sort of
Right.
put the different pieces together.
Mhm.
So that's interesting. We look at it that way, that they're all experiencing a different aspect of something and need to put the stories together. Go ahead, Ron.
I was gonna say that a few years ago, there was something going around on the internet about a dress. And some people
Oh,
saw it as blue and some
oh, right.
saw it as gold.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of those things going around. And
Some were oral even.
I mean,
Right.
it's just, it's in the eye of the beholder.
Interesting. Okay. Cool. So maybe, again, like having the capacity to hold, yeah, you solved the problem, you solved it. So let's go back through it a little bit. So on first blush, we get just the plot of what's going on, that there are 4 great sages who enter into the Pardes, the orchard, and only one emerges unscathed, right? The other 3, one dies, one goes mad, another becomes a heretic. But Rabbi Akiva, who's the oldest of the sages here, and one of our, I mean, these are all amazing sages, so they're all very prominent, but obviously Rabbi Akiva is Rabbi Akiva. So he emerges unscathed, the rest don't. Hold on, I see something in the chat. I just want to open it up. From Tybal, As a Driven Leaf by Rabbi Milton Steinberg. So has anybody read that book? As a Driven?
I have it.
So yeah,
That's a
right.
start.
So he wrote about Elisha ben Abuya, who is known here as Acher meaning the other one. There's a reason. So as a heretic,
Yes,
oh, thanks.
it changed.
Yeah. So Elisha ben Abuya, hello, welcome. Thanks for joining. Elisha ben Abuya is a great sage, but after he becomes a heretic and sort of parts ways with Torah, he gets a different moniker, Acher, so the other one. Sort of a derogatory, we don't, like, he must not be named kind of thing.
I think this is way off base here, but you know, when you're talking about marble, I'm thinking about a stone and they say water. I'm thinking of motion hitting the rock twice instead of only once.
Oh, that's good. Good. So you're saying water twice and making you think of Moshe, and also stone and water thing, where really it's marble. So the stone, water from stone thing, I think is really interesting. But let me give us a little bit of context. So Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel, envisions the divine chariot, has visions of the divine chariot. If you remember when we were talking about, can a blind person recite certain prayers over the luminaries if they can't see the sun and the moon? That happens in the Talmud in context of Ezekiel's divine chariot, Merkavah literature, where it's like, can we pray about the holy chariot if only Ezekiel really saw it? How can we say it if it doesn't apply to us? Remember, that was the context for a conversation about blind people praying over the sun, about the sun and benefiting from the sun and the moon. But so Kabbalistically, this is a very crucial text, and we can get into the weeds of the mysticism going on here, but basically they read it as, it's not that they entered into a literal orchard. It's that they reached the upper realms of, Basically, they were such great sages that they were able to transcend a spiritual ascendance to the upper realm, basically. And so what they're seeing ostensibly is God. And so Ben Azai, who glimpsed upon God's glory, dies. Otherwise, it's just so overwhelming, God's glory. Another one goes mad. A third, for some reason we'll touch on in a bit, becomes an apostate, right? It becomes what's the word, a heretic. And then, but Rabbi Akiva, who presumably averted his gaze, was able to come out unscathed.
You know what this reminds me of?
Mhm.
April 8th, the equinox.
Oh, okay. Don't look directly at it, right?
Look,
Right. Right. So it's something that's so overwhelmingly brilliant or beyond our ability to comprehend or access. But okay, but what do you make of this warning that Rabbi Akiva gives? He says to them, when you reach pure marble stones, this again is talking about the divine chariot, which is described as having these pure marble stones. Don't say water, water, because it is stated, he who speaks falsehood shall not be established before my eyes, meaning that if you see what looks like water, because it's so pristine, the pure marble of God's chariot, if you look at it and you say, well, oh, it must be water, water, that's a lie in front of God. And it says that God, right, the one who speaks falsehood will not be established before God's eyes. So he's warning them, right? Like what you see may be an illusion, and the truth is very important in this upper realm. But there's another thing Kabbalistically that they dive into, which is the duality that Ron picked up on. Why is it water twice? The idea is the upper waters and the lower waters. What does that invoke for us?
Oh, that's part of creation.
Good. Genesis, creation, right? There's the rakia, the firmament that separates the upper waters from the lower waters. But here it's interesting. So it is a true fact to say that there are upper waters and lower waters. The Torah says as much, that there's a separation between the upper and lower waters. But somehow, what Rabbi Akiva is getting at is in this upper realm of purity, that delineation doesn't exist. There is not an upper and lower water. It's all one. So to say that it's like water, water, to separate them as two different waters, it is mistaken in that pristine realm of purity where it's actually they're together. This again is like getting into the weeds of the Kabbalah behind it, which there's so much more. But one other thing I'll say before we dive into what really went on in this orchard is the acronym Pardes. Are people familiar with that? What it stands for? Good. Shat, Remez, Drash, Sod. So this is part of how they explain how did these great sages ascend this upper realm of understanding. It's because they mastered the fourfold approach to Torah, which is ascending in level. So one, and then I'll get Sheila. One is Pshat. Pshat is what? The simple explanation, the basic meaning of text. What is it actually saying? What is Remez?
The hints.
Hints.
Yeah.
Good. It's sort of hinting at a deeper meaning. What is Drash?
Out of Midrash.
Midrash. Hey, there we go. Expanding on it, right? Getting even deeper. And then Sod is that like ultimate level.
That's the Kabbalistic stuff.
The Kabbalistic stuff, the secrets that you can't really fully understand, at least not without diving
At
in.
least not till you're 40. You're not there yet. The rest of us all understand.
Right.
Say that this was, that's any reference to Kabbalah, this was all written before Kabbalah is
Well,
1300s.
mystical stuff.
Yes. So there actually is, right, and this predates that by a lot, but there is actually a scholarly article that I would have had to purchase, and so I didn't, but I read the abstract. But it says, it basically is a debate saying like, is this evidence that our text has these mystical Kabbalistic origins dating way back, or is it not in fact Kabbalistic? Would it be, is it a later overlay that's read into it that doesn't actually exist in there? So,
Who wrote the?
I'm not sure. I have to look it up. But so it's a good point you bring. Is it or is it not in fact intended to be understood Kabbalistically? If we say no, let's move. Oh, and by the way, so the other texts here are just to understand the different reactions. So Ben Azai glimpsed and died. With regard to him, the verse states, precious in the eyes of the Lord is the death. And I usually try to make it gender neutral, so I'm sorry I left that his in, but the death of God's pious ones. So, okay, that's how we know that he died. Precious in the eyes of God is the death of God's pious, like Ben Azai. Ben Zoma glimpsed and was harmed. In Hebrew, nifga, but that's understood to be went mad. And what's the proof text for that? coming from Mishle, from Proverbs, have you found honey? Eat as much as is sufficient, lest you become full and vomit it out. So I think, again, that's sort of this reaction of being overwhelmed by something good, like honey. If you have too much, you'll vomit it out. The way I'm understanding that as sort of, it was too much for him. He
Too
couldn't-
much of a good thing.
Too much of a good thing. And then finally, acher, chop down the shoots. And that is a way of saying euphemistically, I guess, to uproot or to chop down is sort of this heretical reaction to uproot and what is planted. What is planted being our tradition. And so he's trampling on the garden.
So why does Akiva come out safe?
Why does Rabbi Akiva come say? So maybe he didn't glimpse, right?
I walked through.
But he didn't
Yeah.
know.
Or, yeah, and he's the hero here, or maybe it's this like perfect faith. Maybe he's a model of perfect faith where it's not that he wasn't exposed to the same thing that these others were, but he was able to reconcile it with his great faith to the point where it didn't actually compromise that great faith. Tybal.
Didn't at least some of the rabbis decide the fact that he was married helped him?
Oh, yeah. Well, Rabbi Akiva's wife is a major figure. And I'm trying to think, yes, what you're saying definitely rings a bell, but can you elaborate? Do you have the,
No.
okay, fair.
But,
He was married, but they were separated for all those
because
years.
that
Right,
led,
I think
the
so,
only
yeah.
thing I could elaborate is that led to the later custom not to study, I think it's Merkava mysticism unless you're at least 40, married and something else.
Right.
Good, because Rabbi Akiva was 40 when he started the Beit Midrash.
There's something else, I mean, that I learned, and that is Akiva appears in 200, he appears in 500. It's still Akiva. And once I asked one of the professors, the one who was giving the lecture, he said, yeah, they repeated names.
Interesting.
This is Jeffrey Rubenstein, I think, from NYU.
Oh, okay.
He was talking at the rabbi's group.
Oh, wow, okay. I have to look that up. Hope I don't have to pay for it. Okay, let's move on. We're in, yes, that's actually maybe possible. So Kiddushin, who wants to read this now is, okay, what if we don't understand this Kabbalistically? What if we say they actually witnessed something, Acher, Elisha ben Abuya, who was driven to apostasy, to be a heretic from this experience. What if something happened in the orchard that challenged his faith to the point of abandoning it? So let's read now. Who wants to read the second source from Kiddushin?
I'll read it,
Please.
starting with there was.
Yes, there was. Yeah.
There was one whose father said to him, climb to the top of the building and fetch me chicks. And he climbed to the top of the building and dispatched the mother bird and took the young.
Yeah.
But upon his return, he fell and died.
Okay, I hear some recognition,
Ah,
but
the mother
okay,
bird and the,
what are the, okay, good. Yeah, what are the two mitzvot here that
Honor
he
your
did?
parents and shoo away the mother bird.
Good,
Both
good.
of which give you long life.
Good, yes, exactly right. So you guys got it, yeah, that's exactly right. Exodus 20:12. Kaved et avicha ve'et imecha laman ya'arichin yamecha. And you may lengthen your days. Honor your father and mother that you may lengthen your days. And then shiluach haken comes from Deuteronomy 22:7 about if you want the eggs, shoo away the mother bird. It's sort of this act of compassion that the mother bird not have to witness that. And it says laman yitavlach v'harachta yamim, that it will be good for you and you will lengthen your days. So these are two mitzvot.
It means you're gonna lengthen your days in the world to come.
Good. So yes, you guys have already, I'm sorry, I brought something that you already are very.
No, I just,
But that's exactly
I'm
right.
probably
So
only one.
good. So that there are a couple ways to make sense of this now, right? So but Elisha ben Abuya is witnessing perhaps in the Pardes, in the orchard, a son who goes to fulfill two mitzvot, one honoring his parents, who said, go fetch me the eggs, but then also doing shiluach haken, sending away the mother bird, and on his way down, falls off the ladder and dies.
Maybe if you do two minutes vote at the same time.
They cancel each other out. Yeah. Right, so, but so it's this terrible cognitive dissonance of, wait a minute, the Torah says that if you do these things, it'll go well for you, you'll have a long life. versus what I'm actually experiencing in reality, which is why did this boy die after doing 2 mitzvot like that? That should be rewarded, right? This reward punishment model. So then you can reconcile it a couple ways. One, Ron just offered, which is, well, the rabbis do it this way. They say, there's a difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the view of the afterlife. The Sadducees, who were more well off, and I think we touched on this in our class about death and dying, but the Sadducees did not believe in a world to come. And their speculation that is because they actually had it pretty well off in this world. So they felt a person is rewarded for their good deeds and punished for their bad deeds in this world. Their lived experience was that the good are rewarded. But the Pharisees, who were less well off, said, well, how come we're doing all these mitzvot and suffering? So for them, they believed in an afterlife where the balance is meted out, right? The scales are evened out, so that a righteous person might suffer in this world, but their reward is tied up in the world to come. So that's how they make sense of why bad things happen to good people. There's an afterlife where you'll be rewarded. It's sort of and punishment is a purification device, right? If you're it's sort of like this being cleansed through.
You have this now in Gaza, the people who went to hide people or to get guns to save people.
Yeah, so
Also got trapped, so.
right, exactly.
No question, you know.
Right. So what do you do with this? By the way, that's one way of reconciling it. It's not necessarily my way, but it is a way that they reconcile why bad things happen to good people. But let's keep reading. So this is what Elisha ben Abuya presumably may have observed happen. So let's keep going.
You want me to start with where is the
goodness?
Where is the goodness of the days of this one? And where is the length of days of this one?
Both promised by the different mitzvot observed.
Rather, the verse that it may be well with you means in the world where all is well, and that your days may be long. It's referring to the world that is entirely long.
So the world to come.
The Gemara asks, but didn't Rabbi Elazar say that those on the path to perform a mitzvah are not susceptible to harm, neither when they are on their way to perform the mitzvah, nor when they are returning from performing the mitzvah? The Gemara answers, in that case, it was a rickety ladder, and therefore the danger was established. And anyway, that the danger is established, one may not rely on a miracle.
Sorry.
As it is written,
Yeah, we can't read the next one yet because we didn't get to that in Sue's class. We're only on chapter 14.
Samuel. Hi, Jack. Nice to see you all there. Come on in.
Jackie, as it is written with regard to God's command to Samuel to anoint David as king in place of Saul. And Samuel said, how will I go? And Saul will hear and kill me. And God said, take in your hand a calf and say, I have come to sacrifice an offering to God.
Good. So the proof text here being, if Samuel was going to go to perform a mitzvah to anoint King David, why should he have had to worry that Saul was going to kill him? Shouldn't he have been protected in his pursuit of a mitzvah? But here the Torah is saying, look, even here, God says, here's how you do it. You take in your hand a calf, basically use like a disguise or like have a pretense for going. Huh? Treachery, right.
A bride.
Because in the reality that we live in, yes, he is going to try to kill you. So we have to be smart about how we're going to do this. But you could say, why? Why does God need to give him this treachery or this pretense when God should just protect him to do what God is sending him out to do? But I think that is an acknowledgement of the reality of the world that we live in, right? That actually this is not a world of big miracles. Certainly, I believe in the small everyday miracles, but I think there's some recognition here that we live in a world of reality, and we actually can't just naively believe that there will be these big miracles to deliver us if we're in the pursuit of a mitzvah, that we can't be harmed, that we're somehow protected. Right, which is why there were some reactions to the rickety ladder. So if you gasped or if you said, if you sort of chuckled, I'm curious what your reaction was there. What was, yeah, go ahead.
I laugh because it's like putting the blame on him for going up a ladder that he knew he shouldn't have gone up on.
Okay, interesting. So maybe there's a little bit of like, you have to do the research, make sure that it's a sturdy ladder before you do this. Like you can rush to do a mitzvah that we're supposed to do, but not at the expense of safety, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Blame the mother.
you could blame the mother, the parent who sent them,
You should know that it was rickety and not okay.
right? Right, so we can point the finger and blame. But there's something, when I read it, I was sort of feeling more a sense of awe that and appreciation that the rabbis are sort of recognizing here that, look, it's just as simple as it sounds. It was a rickety ladder. It's sort of a tragic, it's terrible, but this is the world we live in, where, it's not about, the whether being protected or not protected. It's in reality, it was just a rickety ladder, and this is the world we live in, where things happen.
Things happen.
But-
Bad things happen to good people.
In the
That's
news,
Rabbi, quick question.
this couple who was with a 1-year-old baby who were in the mama,
Huh.
the shelter room. And her parents were in another shelter room, in another house.
Mhm.
They were killed. And they stayed 22 hours in their mamad and survived.
Wow.
So it's like,
Right, there's a seeming randomness to it. And the issue there is, right, there are some people who want to, and there's nothing wrong with this. I don't mean to, right? Like, this is a very valid approach, which is, I need to believe that everything is part of God's plan, or I need to believe that there is meaning behind everything that happens so that life remains meaningful, even to reconcile tragedy, there must be some deeper meaning so that life stays meaningful and purposeful. There's some greater plan versus this idea that no, it's just a rickety ladder. Like, it actually was a little bit random. You can certainly still find meaning in it, but this goes again, the cognitive dissonance between the sort of faith-based approach and the empirical approach.
Hmm.
Yes.
It would seem in the past, prophets would say, people of Israel, if you perform a certain way, good things will happen.
Right.
And if you don't, then bad things, and then bad things happen because they didn't.
Right.
But that goes contrary to the fact that in much of Jewish history, the one group of people that constantly get persecuted
Right.
is our people not doing anything to cause it.
Right.
It's contrary.
Right. And there's some sort of miraculous thing there that somehow we're defying reason. We're still here today, right? That such a small group that has faced such persecution
Good point.
remains, sort of peers through to something miraculous,
But it's still a tragedy for those who are harmed.
of course. Yes,
And Rabbi Kushner wrote his book, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People?
right,
So if you look at that, why do they?
right.
Why do they? Or do they?
Right. So he actually was very intentional about, it's a common people, it's actually when bad things happen to good people, not why, because in that there's a theological statement in that it's acknowledging that they are going to happen. So this is sort of a book for when it happens, not if.
Yeah.
Or even why necessarily, but he gets into it, right? And
Yes.
one of his big theses is that the problem is when you believe in a God that's all good, all knowing, and all powerful. But if you can part with one, then everything sort of falls into place. And for him, he parts with God being all powerful. That for whatever reason, whether God is self-limiting or simply because of free will or laws of nature, or however God has decided the world should run, God actually is not all powerful to stop things that are, natural law, like disease. Rabbi Kushner's son had
His own
this
child had progeria.
yes, this rare, terrible disease. And for him,
He died when he was about 14.
right, yeah, it's this terrible, like a Benjamin Button kind of
Mhm.
disorder, right? So if God is all powerful, and all knowing,
Well, there's two
then
things.
God can't be all good if God refuses to intervene. It's the same with Holocaust, like, right? So for him, he says, well, for me, it's the one that I can part with. I need my God to be all good. I need my God to be all knowing in a sense, but I don't need my God to be all powerful. I think that so he's able to reconcile that. So I think the way that he resolves his cognitive dissonance is that this is a world that operates under natural law, that it's the nature of bodies to deteriorate and decline. And it's just a world in which disease and natural disasters exist. It's not that God is choosing not to intervene in these things. It's that God does not exercise that power, or maybe can't.
There's two ways you can look at that he didn't intervene. You could either say he didn't cure this boy, or you could say he chose to have this disease.
What do you mean?
God chose to this disease should exist.
No.
So therefore he couldn't save the boy.
No.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's what you said, right? So if everything is from God, that's the question. It's like, why do these terrible things?
Yeah. So
There was
the answer is he wanted this
too.
disease for whatever reason.
There was another element, and the kid wasn't just any kid, the kid was an extremely bright, talented kid.
Mhm.
I knew him.
Yeah. Oh, you did? Wow.
We saw him just before,
Wow.
he was Rabbi Kushner was my husband's roommate.
Oh, my gosh.
He was best man at the wedding, so we knew the kid, and so we saw all this going on.
Yeah.
And he knew all the baseball scores. He played the violin
Wow.
and several other things, and that's what made it harder.
Yeah.
To deal with.
Yeah, sure.
It's why, I mean, if you're going to give him an illness.
Right.
Which is, I think, what a lot of people say.
Right.
Some kids, I mean, to a parent, every kid is precious. But there are some kids that just have something to offer to the world. Why are you depriving the world
Right.
of someone?
Right. And so I think that's how you end up looking at it if you maintain that God is all powerful, right? Like, you did this, or this is from you. Why? How could, versus
Yeah,
if God is not all powerful, then you can envision a God who is suffering there with you, who doesn't want this to be happening. It's not necessarily God's will that this is happening, but rather that this is the world we live in. There are such thing as rickety ladders, and that God is actually in your corner suffering with you. And I think personally that's a much more helpful.
but why doesn't the kid, why doesn't God grant the kid the ability, or the parent, the ability to see that the ladder was rickety?
Right, but
In
that's
other words, he's saying that they're both at fault too, because they didn't look.
right. Sure, but I mean, in reality, how often are we actually able to?
Yeah,
You know,
sometimes you have to deal with the lack
Exactly.
you got.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
So maybe another,
That's basically what it is, and they're all going to be tragedies.
Right.
so the other way to look at it though, maybe, and not that it takes away from the tragedy, but if there. If cancer doesn't matter, what's the incentive to try to cure it? So that's, in a world like this, what the incentive of the tragedy maybe is. On the one hand, and on the other hand, that's why this talks about the world to come, so to speak, because whatever that is, these things are eliminated.
Right. Right.
Are we going to somehow eliminate them, and that's when Mashiach comes? Is it someplace beyond, or that we get back to, like in the Kalmali when we say Began Eden? I don't know, it's above my pay grade, but it makes you think about that. What the first one makes you think about is maybe a little more complicated. I mean, I for one wonder why is the text that gets cited the death of God's faithful, as opposed to just don't look upon God or you die,
Right. Right.
which is all over the Torah
Right.
and maybe more accessible. So maybe that's not exactly what they're seeing. but we're not meant to know what they're seeing.
Right.
We're meant to be cautioned that be careful when you get too close.
Yes. Good. Did you have?
Yeah,
Oh, no. Okay, Jerry, yeah.
no, I know the answer is gonna be that the problem is that humans don't understand God and are trying to still figure out what God is, but I find it difficult that we're always making excuses for God. I'm trying to explain
Yeah.
why something happened that we thought we should be responsible for or at least take responsibility for it.
Yeah.
That's a problem for me.
Yeah, so I once had a conversation with Rabbi Artson, my dean of the rabbinical school, about this, because that's my instinct, is to defend God. Because for me, I do believe in a God who is perfect. You know, I'm open to God being not all powerful, but I still believe in a God who is perfect, and that it's me who doesn't understand. But he fired back, you know, do you really think God needs a PR rep? Like, do you think your relationship with God can't hold this anger?
And why do we do it?
That God is so delicate that you have to protect God? And that made me think of it differently, that, you know, yeah, maybe. And what I actually think is important about anger versus, and I know we talked about this, and so there's a machloket here as well. Is anger ever valuable? Maybe no. Maybe it's, and certainly the Hasids would say that the Hasidim hated anger. They were very angry at that anger. I think they did not think it was worthwhile. Right, we talked about this back in our first session.
Right.
But what changed my vantage point once, I had a colleague who taught about anger being a relational emotion as opposed to, say, shame or apathy, which is more inward or just sort of, you know, but anger is directed at someone and its goal may be repair of the relationship or closeness, right? You're angry because something is violated in your understanding of this relationship, and it can bring you closer. So in that way, I think, right, like your relationship with God actually could be could benefit from anger, because it like any healthy relationship, sometimes you get angry, but you resolve it and your relationship grows because it can hold that, as opposed to if you're stifling it or saying, you know, that has no place in my relationship with God. So yeah, I can absolutely hear what you're saying, where it annoys you that people continue to play like defense attorney when God doesn't need that. And frankly, your relationship can hold all emotion.
We always talk about our being in the image of God. We're made in the image of God. But if we turn that around, that means that the fallacies we see in humans are the same ones that God.
Right, you could make that claim, sure. Yeah, which is interesting.
But I was gonna say that, we're looking at this, a finite number of people in a finite period of time. And the problem we have is we can't see the big picture. We don't know what's supposed to happen in the future. We don't know why certain things, I mean, I can take the example of the Kushner story is that boy had to die in order for the rabbi to write the book.
So you could, yeah, but
I mean,
here's some
we don't know,
pushback,
and
right.
how important has that book been?
Right, I know there's a lot of people jumping on it, so I'll just say one. Right, so I have a friend who lost her mother really young, and she grew up very like in a religious school and, you know, like an Orthodox Jewish. And she said to me once, like, if that was part of God's plan, I don't want to worship that God. Right. So that is the trouble with that kind of reconciling, that kind of, not to say you can't have that theology, but it brings those challenges. Well, then, you know, what kind of plan, what kind of God would have that plan? But I want to keep going to this next one. So this now is a continuation of the story of Acher. Acher, one of his students was Rabbi Meir. And if we remember Rabbi Meir, from our discussion of the Tanur of Achnai, the oven of Achnai, he was the one who was like the plastered jug who doesn't lose a drop of water. Right? He's a halachic master, and he was the one who said it was still kasher was still pure, but the other rabbi said no, and he had all these, right? God supported Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi Yoshua said, lo b'shamayim it's not in heaven. Right? That's the same Rabbi Meir. So Elisha ben Abuya, Acher, was his teacher, and they remained close. Even though he was sort of ostracized, right? He was after this whole incident where he left Torah, certainly he wasn't welcome in those spaces anymore, but Rabbi Meir kept in relationship with him. And this is a story of one of their chats. So they're walking along on a Shabbat and learning Torah, discussing Torah.
Yeah, why was he riding a horse?
Good.
on Shabbos.
Exactly, because he is
Because he's
a heretic. He very
he's the
purposefully was
heretic.
right. So Ron points out that it's violating Shabbat to ride a horse on Shabbat. But he's doing that.
But yet he was so I guess I read ahead, but I guess he's been so concerned that Rabbi Meir not break the.
Good. Okay. So pause. I want to let us get there. So who wants to read? And anyone on Zoom is welcome as well.
So it's that mayor would still pay attention to him.
Isn't that great? I love it.
That is a lesson,
Yeah.
that just because he's an affair,
Right.
there is still something to learn from such a person.
Yes.
You know that he doesn't agree with, that he's going to have a different opinion.
Yes. And this goes back to instead of trying to tie up and resolve our cognitive dissonance with a bow, instead, I would say an alternative model to that is Rabbi Meir and Elisha ben Abuya riding along together. Right? We're two very different realities. One is a faith-based approach, one is a more empirical approach, and yet they're able to walk together. Right? It's not one over the other. It's somehow walking in tandem. But let's who wants to read?
I will.
Oh, I see. Tybal,
It's okay.
Tybal, is it a hand to read or a comment?
It was a comment, which is,
Great, so Francis,
we're still in relationship with Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya because he's got a learning in Pirkei Avos.
Yes, right. He's preserved. I mean, he was a master. He was a sage. He had a ton of incredibly deep Torah to offer, and we retained that Torah. So that is a nice kind of way of saying, you are more than your worst moments, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's a very important point for us to remember.
Yeah.
And we don't, some of the super orthodox, they won't.
They're just by association, right? Yeah,
Because they can't learn anything from us.
right. And because you don't want to legitimize, or by association, you're lending credence, saying, oh, well, there's something called Mared Ayin, right? So if I were to go and have an Impossible Burger in a restaurant and it was a cheese Impossible Burger, that's Mared Ayin, because somebody might see me with the kippah eating a cheeseburger and say, oh, I guess it's kosher. But they didn't know that it was a vegetarian burger and it's okay. Right? So it's Mared Ayin. So here, if Rabbi Meir is walking along with a Acher who's riding on a horse on Shabbat, somebody might say, I guess it's okay. It's kosher to ride on Shabbat, because why else would Rabbi Meir be associated? But good, Francis, did you want to read? Okay, great.
The sages taught. There was once an incident involving a Acher who was riding on a horse on Shabbat, and Rabbi Meir was walking behind him to learn Torah from him. Acher said to him, Meir, turn back, for I have already estimated, according to the steps of my horse, that the Shabbat boundary ends here. Rabbi Meir said to him, you too return. He said to him, but have I not told you already that I have already heard behind the dividing curtain, return, rebellious children, apart from Acher.
Okay, so real quick, let's dive into that. So this is a quote from Jeremiah, from Yirmiyahu, return, rebellious children. But then Acher heard chutz me'acher, except for Acher. So he believed that he was beyond redemption. He believed that, right? Jeremiah saying, return, you could always do tshuva, you could always come back, but that he heard chutz me'acher, except for Acher, which is counter to what we understand of the Jewish value of tshuva, that anybody can attempt to do tshuva, right? It's something that, but I heard a rabbi teach this who said, here's what it is. It's not that God said, return, rebellious children, except for Acher, because you're unforgivable. It's that Elisha ben Abuya identified at this point only as Acher. So even if God is saying, return, rebellious children, chutz me'acher, that doesn't mean chutz me Elisha ben Abuya. right? That if he had clung to that part of himself, that was Elisha ben Abuya, he's allowed to come back, but Acher is not. So that doesn't mean that the same individual is not allowed back. It just means that aspect of him.
So if you are ultra nasty, I mean, we have it where people, you can be negative, but you have to be proud of it.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's some people
Yeah.
who just, well, we have in Congress. In other words, they cannot appreciate that somebody can have another point of view.
Right.
Sorry to bring this all up, but when you think about the beauty of this class, you can really see how relevant it all is today.
Yeah.
So nothing changes.
No, I'm really glad. But right, so that's what that end means. That Acher is sort of saying like turn back. And it's beautiful that everybody laughed at, he measured out the Tehum in his mind. He knows what by the way, so that's the Shabbat boundary. So it's 2,000 cubits in every direction of where your starting out point is. So they're walking along and he's on the horse and Acher, who is defected from Torah, right? He still is calculating, right? Once Elisha ben Abuya, always Elisha ben Abuya, right? He still has that part of him, even if he doesn't identify with it. And it's interesting, the Hebrew for turn back mer, right? Chazor le'acharecha, you can see acher in there. You know, like turn back from maybe from me. I don't know. That's just a drush, right? But they're sort of, there's a love here, right? So no, come with me, right? Come back with me. It's not too late for you. But he says, no, I go beyond. You stay within the boundary, the Shabbos boundary, but I go beyond. And so the question that I want to ask you is this boundary that we create for ourselves, which we can metaphorically understand to be our tradition, right? The Tehum of our Jewish circle, our Jewish boundaries, our halakha, being bound by it. Do you find it ultimately more helpful or more limiting? More literally limiting, hurtful, right? What's gained by staying within that boundary? And what's lost by not venturing beyond it?
Or are we making artificial?
Besides ham, I know, besides ham.
So this reminds me of a Rosh Hashanah sermon that wasn't given here. But the rabbi who wrote it makes the point that he tells a story about his family being at one of the national parks, and there's a great view from the top of this mountain or hill or whatever it is. And it's getting late on Friday. And do we climb the hill or are we going to be in trouble and violate Shabbat? And what he says at that point in the sermon is, for those of you who have an easy answer to this, I'm obviously not climbing the hill. I'm obviously going to observe Shabbat. You can leave the room or read a book or whatever you want to do. This is aimed at the ones who feel like Shabbat is a limitation on my enjoyment of this amazing sunset from this beautiful view.
Right.
So they do climb the mountain and they see the sunset and the beautiful view, and praise the glory of God for having created it. And I guess the point he was making is that it's not always black and white. And that if you can come back from the mountain acknowledging that maybe you violated Shabbat in some ways to see that view, but have a better Shabbat for having seen it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's in a sense part of what could be going on here. I mean, he's saying to Meir, you don't want to violate Shabbat. Good for you. You read a book or whatever, turn back. You have to turn back.
Right.
Maybe poignantly, Meir is saying you need to turn back too.
Yeah.
Let's observe Shabbat together.
Right.
We're learning together. And for better or worse, I think this is a different answer because we understand Acher to be an apostate, but it feels somehow related in a sense, other than after he crosses the line, he's not coming back. Whereas on the other hand, this rabbi and his family may have crossed a line, but they did come back. So.
Right, that's interesting. So is it as final, right? Like if you cross that line, you never come back, which I think this story sort of dramatically is saying that, like once you go, it's like you're venturing into the beyond where you're not limited by halakha or gain the benefits of Jewish community and all that entails and a life of Torah.
Well, and some say there are no accidents, right? So yesterday I happened to be reading something that referenced crossing the Rubicon.
Mm.
And the result of crossing the Rubicon, of course, is that the Roman Republic is lost and the empire starts.
Uh-huh.
Was that a good thing? Not for us.
Right. Interesting. It's interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so what I was gonna.
And then
say-
Tybal, I think you had your hand too. Ron, go
What
ahead.
I was gonna say is that the halacha specifically, maybe not just halacha, but other things, it's an artificial boundary that we've decided to accept. And that maybe we should push the envelope.
Well, even halakha pushes the envelope of halakha,
Right,
right?
well,
Like,
I mean, it changed, well, at least in conservative Judaism, the halacha changes.
yeah, but I would say even in Orthodoxy, like it's always meant to be something that is played with and it's a
But, I mean,
game,
but-
like
but so
it's
much-
innovation and
So,
creativity.
so much of our halacha is fences around the real
Right, yeah,
restrictions.
right,
And so we should push the boundaries at certain times
yeah,
and hard and sometimes.
But they do it, for example, that they have the Shabbos elevator, the way they, they're trying to always find some kind of electricity or that you can use.
right,
Well, this reminds me also of
right.
of another opportunity where I was happened to be learning with an Orthodox rabbi who made the point that in this day and age, if I want to walk to Mentor on Shabbat and I could actually make it, that's not a problem because it's the same urban area. But I can't walk to a park in Geauga County because I would have walked outside the urban area, even though it was a shorter walk.
Right.
So
Yeah.
That's annoying.
Wait, Tybal, did you have your hand, Tybal?
Those things I.
Well,
get.
I just want to say that existentially, the idea that human beings need boundaries,
Yeah,
regardless of what the boundaries are,
right. Yeah, absolutely, right.
I
The
mean,
bound-
helps us cope with the idea that we can in fact exert some control or the illusion. Let me change the word idea to illusion.
Nice, right? It gives us structure, gives us a sense of control, gives us a sense of identity, right? If you don't have that boundary, it's like if everything is, if there are no insiders there, if there are no outsiders, there are no insiders, no insiders, no outsiders, right? There's a sense of community. Also like music, right? You'd say, well, I should just be able to pick up a guitar and do it, sit at a piano. No, scales and the boundaries of time signatures and keys actually allow you to make music, right? So I think that's a lovely way of looking at halakha. Without those boundaries, you can't make music. They're productive.
but you
beneficial.
also have to have a sense of why you're doing something. If you create this specific
For
boundary
the sake of having a boundary.
and it gets to the point where somebody's agonizing over, is it 1 inch more
Yeah,
or 2 inches less
yeah,
and forget about why it's there.
right, the meaning
Get
behind it.
back to what this rabbi was saying in his Rosh Hashanah sermon, which is what we're ultimately trying to do is make Shabbat both different,
Yeah.
special, and elevated.
Good, right, you don't want
So
to
are
lose
we
sight of
doing
the goal.
that by worrying about whether or not I'm an inch too close or
Right.
2 inches too
Does
far.
it defeat the spirit?
No.
Yeah, good. Alina.
Two things I have. The boundaries is to avoid to overgrow. But on the other hand, if you don't expand and be flexible,
That's it.
you are losing a lot.
Good,
So you
yeah.
have to be flexible also.
Yeah, so
And
that's, yeah,
the problem with being what I call more religious than the Pope.
yes,
You know what I mean?
yes, I do. Yeah.
To be some kind of flexibility in
Yes.
everything.
Yeah.
And I think looking back on October 7th, with everything that preceded it, with all the Sinat Achim and everything, it was like the only good thing that happened after 7/11, and I hate what happened. I
couple
cannot
days.
tolerate it.
Right, it's
They are still
coming together,
going.
yeah.
But the whole country.
Right.
Together.
The Orthodox, the non-Orthodox.
Put the differences aside.
Yeah. And I wonder if there is like God's doing it because he saw what it's
No.
bringing. All the hatred.
Right.
It's terrible.
Right.
We can't.
Right. Again, it's sort of that, does God work that way or not is the question theologically. But I understand the point of that there is, yeah, no, absolutely.
Make
But I-
excuses again.
Right. But I wanna mention something interesting, which is that Baruch Spinoza, who was ostracized from the community, put under cherem, rabbinic cherem, right? This is 1600s Amsterdam. He was one, if you have to point to like, where did Jewish modernity begin? Many scholars point to him, though it's debatable. But sort of the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment, right? He was an Enlightenment thinker. He grew up yeshiva bacher, I believe. Like I actually think this was one of his favorite. I think I learned this somewhere, that this was one of his favorite tractates, one of his favorite sugyot of Talmud, because for him, he identified with Elisha ben Abuya, where he was going beyond the boundary of traditional Judaism for the sake of Haskalah, of this enlightenment, where he felt like the rabbinic control was stifling to the flourishing of academic thought. But that's not where I'm ending, right? That is sort of one element of having both, right? It's so in which way, in what ways is it limiting to feel you can't pursue empiricism or enlightenment for the sake of, you know, the narrow boundaries of traditional Judaism, versus if you only had that, if you like went beyond and gave up on the beauty of a life of Torah and Jewish community, what you're missing out there, and can you have both? So instead of the cognitive dissonance of, you know, what my religion tells me about lengthening your days if you do mitzvot versus what my reality is telling me is that that's not the case. Therefore, to resolve my cognitive dissonance, I have to reject religion or Judaism or Torah, versus, you know, I can still cling to the value and beauty of religious thought while also acknowledging that sometimes it was just a rickety ladder. That there are that's where I'm at. Remember that this is all stuff that is like the midrashim that have most shaped me and my thought. And this is a big one for me, where it's like, I think that there's so much to benefit from secular society, from secular thought, from really trying to learn as much as you can, but also coming back to the beauty of Torah and that it's big enough to hold all of it, even if it seems contradictory, even if it seems that actually, you know, instead of defending it or coming up with, you know, the 7 days of creation are really epochs or whatever you want to say, versus I'm actually okay to stand in that space of cognitive dissonance and believe that my faith is strong enough to hold it, as opposed to trying to neatly resolve it all. Which brings me to the final text, and we're at time. So this is from Rabbi Dr. Aaron Leeds Mokler, who was like the director of spirituality or something at Yeshivat Maharat. This is a women's yeshiva in New York. Orthodox, yeah.
This is today.
This is today. She's
Okay.
contemporary, yeah.
That's the word I couldn't think of.
So she takes the 4 who entered into the Pardes and maps it onto the 4 children at the Passover Seder, saying, you know, Akiva is the wise one. And so, you know, the simple one is the one who went mad, who couldn't, like, lost the ability to speak kind of thing. So it's an interesting mapping. So she references that. We're not actually going to talk about that, but I just want you to know why she references it. Who would like to read? Go for it. Larry, thanks.
My aim here is not to map the 4 sons onto the 4 rabbis perfectly, but to raise the possibility that the 4 children do not only offer 4 different approaches to the practice of Pesach, but 4 different approaches to one of the deepest challenges of the modern world: how to square the truth with Torah.
Or how to square truths with truth. But that's a good interpretation.
how to square truth with truth,
Uppercase truth.
Right.
how to live with or in the gaps between all that we are taught and all that we cannot help but see. The time of
You got it, lebincha, and you tell the story to your children, teach your children the Passover story.
it's not only a chance to tell our collective story, but a chance to reflect on the cognitive, existential, and spiritual challenges that emerge when we tell our story that way.
So I just want to end with that, going back to the very beginning where Rabbi Akiva says, don't say mime. Meaning, don't say that, first of all, it's not water, it's actually stone, right? But also don't say that there's a separation between the waters, because in this pure realm, they're actually connected. So I look at that as like, let's say, secular thought and religious thought, that they're both mine, they're both nourishing, they're both life-sustaining water. And don't say mine, like, don't say that there is a separation between them when they can actually, in this upper realm, somehow paradoxically, be connected and lead to spiritual elevation and academic elevation.
The connecting of the waters just reminded me of the mikvah, where you have this pool that came from the faucet, and you have a little tiny thing with the rainwater.
Right, exactly. Right. To make it living water.
To make it living water, right.
Good. Yeah, good. The mikvah outing with Rabbi Alex. Yeah.
So that's where I got that.
Yeah.
The Orthodox rabbi that I've learned with says that for non-Orthodox, it would say for Shabbat, is very restrictive. Obviously, you can't do this, you can't drive, everything else. And he says for the Orthodox, it's exceptionally freeing because all of a sudden you don't have the phone,
Right.
you don't have the TV. Yes, you have to prepare for it. You don't have to worry about shopping or plans or anything else like that.
Yeah.
It's completely freeing.
Right.
Except for the weather.
Having experienced both, it's, yes,
Right.
it is, because both my kids are Orthodox, so when I go with them, all of a sudden I have to remember, don't put the phone in my pocket, Orthodox, and we're walking instead of driving, everything else. Don't answer the phone. And yes, all the cares are gone and everything. It's a whole different lifestyle. You're going to be with people. It's a very freeing in many ways, but yet, we as conservatives see it exact opposite. So you kind of have to realize in both worlds, it's kind of, it's what you take from it.
Right.
If you have a belief that this is going to be free, that the boundaries will set you free.
Right, exactly.
Because, there is no freedom, when people say, give me freedom, there is no freedom without boundaries. Otherwise, society doesn't exist. But they're putting more boundaries on life because to them, it makes things easier.
Right.
And knowing that this is what's going to be.
Yeah.
And they don't have perhaps struggles that we do. Saying, how much of this am I gonna take? How much not?
It's shaking her head,
No,
and I
okay.
think there's a point.
No, I wanted Larry, you say you're. I don't think
Men,
you
it's
find
more
it.
freeing than for women.
Yeah.
Because for men, they don't marry and do things.
Well,
Waiting 2 days to find out if we're going to have a grandson or granddaughter
Yeah,
over Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah.
Or we've waited 3 days when it was 3 days out. I mean,
Yeah.
or when they're very ill. I'm a worrier.
Yeah.
I'm a consummate Jewish mother, so to not have communication for 3 days or 2 days or even 1 day.
Hurts your Shabbat because you can't.
Oh.
And this is where I come back to that,
Somebody to take a diaper.
Water is the example.
Yeah.
Of course, water is so essential to life,
Right.
but interestingly, water comes in different forms. It comes as liquid, comes as steam, comes as ice, and now they've discovered a fourth state of water. And so water can take different forms. It doesn't have to always be the same.
Right.
It's all still water.
Yes. Good.
oh, if it's solid, it could be like the stone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bad to water, yes.
Different perspective.
How much and
Same with
what form?
Scientific.
Fire and water kill
I
or.
like the example of the 7 days of creation. there are a couple of concepts that you might consider. One is the concept of relativity. Things that appear to be a certain way may very well not be that way from a different perspective. That's not a minor, that's a very major concept. And the other, it's not exactly science, but it's a different way of looking at things. It's to say, well, what you considered literal was actually figurative. And it was a way of trying to give an idea, not necessarily that it's literal. And it just gives you some element of flexibility thrown in.
Good. Yeah, I love that. Good. I wanna, we're past time, but I just wanna end in that idea that cognitive dissonance, if we try to resolve it right away, do we deprive ourselves of the growth that can happen in that space between two realities?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, everyone.
There's always cognitive